Okay, so I know yesterday we did a lot of reflection, if you will, talking about the sacred box. And because dealing with the sacred box deals a lot with our foundation, remember, it's all of the things that we perceive to be valuable, all the things that we treasure. A lot of times, those are the places that we become most agitated when someone attempts to come near our sacred box, because we want to protect it at all costs, because those are the things that are valuable to us. We've learned that racism is a lot larger than what we realized, right? We also learned not to be a Richard, right? We know Richard was a prime example of an ineffective ally. Hart may have been in the right place, but boy, did he mess it up, right? So I definitely want you to know that any of those things that you're thinking about sometimes can be somewhat challenging, because we're at a place now where we may be confronting some of our traditions, some of the things that we valued, some of the things that we believed or perceived to be true. That's right, Sarah. Don't be a Richard. Richard Henry Pratt. Don't be him. And so, so if you remember anything, as you say, if I'm phrasing a statement, anything remotely similar to Richard, it might be wrong. So you definitely don't want to be a Richard. And building a sanctuary, what we're talking about, building a safe place where people can feel like they can come to you and retreat to you, you have to possess a level of honesty. Address those areas that may be of concern to you, or places that you may not be comfortable with. I remember when we first started the Love is a Parable journey, it was a lot of older people that were coming to me seeking guidance. And for me, I realized, you know what? That is a level of ageism, because I'm thinking, oh, I'm supposed to go to the older people. But when they were coming to me, I'm like, no, it's not supposed to be that way. So it was a moral conflict for me, because I felt like I was being like disrespectful talking to people older than me. But no, we're all in this together as a family, and we can all learn from one another. So that was a huge opener for me. And so when things are uncomfortable, talk to them, address them. Okay? We're gonna, there we go, I muted it. We're gonna make sure you mute all of your lines, only open them when you have a question or a comment. Okay, so building a sanctuary does deal with a level of uncomfortability. That's why in the group, I also shared a message that we teach in the Love is a Parable curriculum about dealing with betrayal. Because a lot of times when we confront our sacred box, we also are confronting areas of betrayal. Because we feel like when something we find out is not true, we feel like people lied to us maliciously, or they did something wrong, and we start thinking negatively of that person, that situation, that incident, and it's a level of betrayal. Anytime truth exposes something that wasn't truthful, we feel like we've been lied to, and we don't want to feel that way. So you definitely want to know that sometimes as you uncover things, it's just that you're uncovering it. You didn't know. And as you begin to know, you do better. Okay? One of the things we also talked about is how slavery impacted us. So you'll hear songs that sometimes we confuse Negro spirituals with gospel. You'll hear songs like, follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd, for the old man is waiting for to carry you to freedom if you follow the drinking gourd. That song was a song that was sung during slavery to let slaves know that they were about to leave. And so when they started to sing the song, the masters thought, oh, they were singing a song about their salvation. But when they said follow, when they knew that it was time to follow the drinking gourd, that was following the Big Dipper. That was following the Dipper, and that's the direction that they were going in. And the old man that was waiting, a lot of people thought that they were talking about Moses. No, they were actually talking about Pegfoot John. That's why I said right foot, flick foot, traveling on, because he had a peg foot, and you would see the holes in the ground to make sure that you were going in the right direction for the Underground Railroad. So one of the things that we've learned a lot throughout culture is that we had to always develop a level of code switching. We had to know how to speak publicly, but also discreetly in certain environments. That's why church was a place of freedom twofold. It was a place to prepare our freedom, but also a place of worship, a place to leave our current restraints in a spiritual sense, but also strategically a place to meet to prepare our physical freedom. So that's why a lot of times when we talk about things, they're so deep. Church is just not church for us. Church is a retreat for us. Church is a meeting ground. That's why in the Black community, it's usually the focal point that hold things together. And so when you're dealing with most Blacks, you're dealing with Blacks who have a complex background and a complexity to the way that they process life. So if you want to be a sanctuary for them, you have to always think that probably everything that they do has multiple meanings, not just one. Okay? Now tell me your thoughts about this. James Baldwin, he said, I think that the inability to love is the central problem because that inability masks a certain terror. And that terror is the terror of being touched. And if you can't be touched, you can't be changed. And if you can't be changed, you can't be alive. That's a lot of weight in that statement, isn't it? Anybody want to take a stab at it? I will call some names out.
Jay, this is Darcy.
Okay. Hey, Darcy.
I don't know if you can hear me. Hi there. I was on mute. To me, it's if you're not able to feel, right? If you're not able to hear other people's experiences, you're not able to be in touch with other people's experiences, how are you really living? If you're living with blinders on and you're living in the confines of not even trying to understand where someone else is coming from, I don't think that's really a life. I don't know if that's what he's saying, but that's what it felt like to me. A way to interpret it. I
actually love that look at it. But one of the things that I wanted to kind of like highlight at the beginning is talking about mask and terror. It's a horrible thing when we are living in a place where, one, we have to mask ourselves, meaning being hidden, and then how horrible that is when we are unable to be our organic self.
And that's perfect, the perfect word for looking at not just the quote that you used, but the quote comes from James Baldwin had a double whammy, so to say, right? A double-edged sword. He dealt with being Black and his sexuality. And so it wasn't until later that he began to really unmask the notion of sexuality. So he goes deeper, not only being Black, but being Black and, having to deal with his sexuality. So yeah, he wore a lot of masks, and as you may. So it is quite relevant to what you are saying. And I'm sorry that when you said mask, I interjected most immediately because that's on point. Yeah.
Well, you can, guys. If you don't know, that's my other mom. So she can interject anyway. Yes, ma'am. Anytime. Anytime, it doesn't matter. You're not wrong. Sarah said, only dead fish go with the flow. We have to continue to learn to grow and to live. I love that. I don't know if you meant to rhyme, but it was perfect. Carla said, We Wear the Mask by Paul Laurence Dunbar. And Sarah also said, we literally cannot grow without change, physically, mentally, spiritually, etc. Brian said, many people purposefully reject love, kindness in order to reject change in their life. Stagnation is not living. So if you don't allow yourself to be loved, and you can't allow yourself to grow. Thank you. You guys are hitting it right there, because a lot of people are afraid to feel. Because what I feel, I am then held accountable for. What I believe, once I acknowledge those things, I'm held accountable for those things. And a lot of times we don't want to take ownership of those things. Have you ever thought, it's amazing how doors are large enough for couches to go through, but only one person at a time? Well, this is very similar to life. Though there are many who share this life with you, there is only one who lives it. Life has the ability to exist, develop, reproduce, transfer ownership, but holds no responsibility. The accountability is on us. Accountability forces us to develop a frame of mind to be open enough, to be emotional enough, and physically there as a place of refuge and safety for the marginalized and the disenfranchised. It is a huge step towards inclusion if we're able to possess that ability to be that place of refuge and safety. However, there is a need to be a person who provides the refuge, not only the safety, but also the protection. Sometimes we provide either protection and not the safety, or we'll be a refuge with no protection or safety. Protection forces us to prevent something from happening. And it's the safeguarding of our mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being, protecting us from any hurt, harm, or danger. So when we talk about being that refuge, when we talk about being that sanctuary, when we talk about being that ally, it is more than likes, shares, and follows. It is more than just holding someone accountable here and there. It is a lifestyle that is accustomed to it, where people can retreat within you. Angela said there is a great book called Safe People. The neat thing is it helps you think about if you are a safe person. Thank you. Keep dropping those jewels. And Caroline, I'm sorry for missing you when we were talking about the mask. She said it is easier to put on a mask than to feel. Well, remember we talked about when many of us, when we were brought into this world, the very first 2 years, we were taught nothing but stop, no, don't do that. Even though that the intent was to protect us and to help us, it also taught us how to really put on our first mask. Meaning, don't listen to how I feel, just do whatever I need to do to not get in trouble. And you'll be amazed at how we learn to be chameleons in different environments, in different situations. So that's why when it's time to be an ally is the stripping away of all of that, being an organic person who understands the system that we live in, but is here to help aid and guide another vessel. So I wanted to share something with you. Remember I talked to you guys about colorism and the impact of slavery. Well, I wanted to share with you my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my aunt. If you see my great-grandmother, she was born December 25th, 1888, excuse me. December 25th, 1888. Her mother was the product of a former slave and a local doctor. We have no background, no birth certificate, only a death certificate, because remember during that time, a lot of us weren't considered human. And as we became human by law, the only thing that most of them had for a great deal of time was just death certificates, because it was an estimate around when they were born, because nobody really cared. And even in court documents on her death certificate, she had no last name, my great-great-grandmother. So that's why my great-grandmother, Cleo Dunn Boyd, was a fair-skinned lady. Many thought that she was possibly white, but she was also proud because she was also part Cherokee, and my great grandfather was Blackfoot Indian. So they produced, of course, my grandmother along with 7 other children. And so my grandmother was very sickly, Cora Boyd Beard. She was very sickly, so it was a responsibility of my aunt, the oldest sister, we call her Aunt Dot. That's her hair there, but she would wear a blonde wig and go and act as if my grandmother was a servant, just so my grandmother could get groceries and things like that. This is also why in certain families, they were hoping to have a child that was closer to what we consider whiteness, because certain privileges came with that. And it was a responsibility of some of those lighter hued family members to protect the family by helping them to provide. So I wanted to give you somewhat of a visual of what that looked like. And it was an amazing journey because we have all these shades in our family and everything in between in our family, and to hear the different impacts of different movements that were happening throughout, not only from a national standpoint, but within certain cultures and certain constructs that we still have that impact us today. Any thoughts? Any questions? Okay. So let's talk about it. Colored, Negro, Afro-American, African-American, Black American, people of color. Which one do you think is appropriate in 2020? You put your guess in the chat. I know everybody's like, I don't want to do this because I don't want to be wrong. You're in a safe place. Put what you think your answer is. Colored, Negro, Afro-American, African-American, Black American, people of color.
I think different people feel different ways about different words. And I think that some descriptions of people, how they self-identify, some people that self-identify, they might feel more comfortable, they say, I'm Black. Some people say, you know, I don't want people to say I'm Black, I'm African-American. And I think that it's important to hear that. And I also think that it's hard for some people because you don't know maybe the right words to say or how to not offend somebody. So I think that's a good conversation.
Right. And the truth of the matter is you're spot on. It really depends on the Black person that you ask. Everybody has their preference because everybody has something attached to it. I typically go with people of color because it's just so much easier for me because I like the construct of human, man of color. So I like that. So I typically go with people of color. But you have other people that go with Black American. I say Black mostly when it's time to talk about a culture, not necessarily a people, but you have other people who have different feelings about these words, also depending when they grew up. So their age, where they were, all of that matters. So you really don't know. So I would always say, whenever you're around people, you know, if you see that, look at the body language. If they find it offensive, like, I apologize. What do you prefer? That's the best way. The one thing we all can agree on is just don't say the N word and we'll be all right. That's the one thing that we can agree on, is just not saying the N word. But everything else is open for a great conversation, open for a dialogue, and all of those great things. I think that put a lot of people at ease, right? Because a lot of times we focus on, well, which one to say, but the truth of the matter is just ask the person that you're with, like, what do they prefer? But usually, because you do have some Blacks who don't like to be called people of color. And you do have some that don't like to be called African American, you know what I'm saying? So it depends on who they are. I always thought that colored and Negro are not okay. Is that wrong? To be honest, it depends. My family is a little bit older, so I still hear people say color in my family. I do hear where I'm from. I have also heard older white people say colored, and not meaning it derogatory, but it depends on that person and stuff like that. To be honest, well, I guess, Mom, you can say whatever you want to say. I know that for me, I actually like colored more than black. What you got, Glenda Green?
No. Black. No.
You like black more than color?
No. Black. Yeah. Don't want color.
See, that's a prime example. Like, that's her preference.
No.
But the only thing, the best thing to always do is to ask.
Right. Right. Mm-hmm.
Caroline said, my grandmother said colored until the day she died. It made me cringe, even though one of her best friends was African American. And he was okay with her saying colored. On her deathbed, she said she wanted him to speak at her funeral, and she didn't care if someone had a problem with it, because even though he was colored, he was her best friend. I'm confused and I'm black. I'm learning new terms daily. BIPOC is a new one for me, right? And my grandpa used colored, and it made me cringe too. My children always laugh at me because I try to describe someone by anything other than race. When I finally say black, white, etc., they laugh. Cordell said he prefers black. He doesn't like African American or Black American, because no other Americans are usually identified by their ethnicity first. I'm American, and we're gonna go that route. There you have it. So my first preference is people of color. My mom wants black, and Cordell would like, and I lost him. Cordell would prefer black as well. So it all depends. And Tara says she don't even know. And Ed said, don't call him colored, call him African American. You see how this can be confusing for everybody? But the best thing to do is have a conversation, because true offenses happen when you don't have the conversation and just assume. And so one of these things opens up another door of, is that we got to stop making blacks representatives of all things black. You do know that there's a lot of different blacks, and there's a lot of different cultures, right? So one black is only representing where they're from or what they believe. They can't represent everything that's black. As you can see right now, we have 5 different people who have all of their preferences. And they have a certain way that they feel about it. I like people of color. Some people like black. Ed likes black American. My wife even likes black. So it depends. And so the question is, using the term black community, is that okay? Actually, it is. It is okay to say black community because right now it's culturally accepted. Or you can say the African American community. I've heard that as well. Black American always confuses me, even though I hear it. I just like, it's just too much going on. Pick one. So it depends. But the thing is, just have a conversation about it. And depending on who you talk to, it will always be in your best interest. Ed said he grew up in Massachusetts, and the original birth certificate was so offensive. It said Negroid. Ooh, that's interesting. Can I get a picture of that? That's kind of dope. I mean, not dope that they called you that, but I haven't seen that since they talked about the 3 different types of humans. So that's interesting. So yes, prime example, wherever someone is from, they have their own culture. And the most dangerous thing that we can do is try to make one black person, one person of color, one African American, the representative for all things that are in the entire black culture and community. Okay? It is
people of color include because you've heard brown, black, skin, right? Brown, black, red
Yes,
skin.
ma'am.
Yeah. And so people of color would represent all of that, and that would be, you know, supposedly Indians, Asians, Black, you know, on it goes. Just know that's the problem with what's going on right now with, I don't want to start a whole new Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter, you know, and you need to know about that. But that's the notion of going even with Black and not necessarily color, because it represents so many other, you know, ethnicities.
Yep, that's what Tara was bringing up, BIPOC. I didn't even want to introduce that because that's a whole new thing to separate everybody else. BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, the Indigenous people, and people of color for that very reason. So it's so many different things out there. And the thing that I just want to drive home for you guys tonight is just have a conversation about it. And if it makes you feel uncomfortable too, think about this too. If it makes you feel uncomfortable even to ask, that's when it's time to revisit your sacred box and say, why am I even uncomfortable with asking? Okay? My kids cringe if I ever use Black the same way I did when my grandmother used color. I'm sorry for the babies. So remember, we talked about how racism is really bigger than what we wanted to give and what we really initially realized. Racism is systematic, amorphic, and individualistic. We constantly are contending with these things every day. Every day when we're talking about racism, the reason why it's so hard to define, it's so hard to sometimes to describe, is because these are the things that we have to contend with. It's ingrained in our culture so much that some people don't even recognize it and they think that life is normal. But at the same time, it's so strategic, it's designed to keep people of color oppressed for a very reason. And yes, there are individual experiences that happen that we can identify, but sometimes it lingers just enough not to be recognized, but to make an impact. So when we're talking about racism, sometimes it's so emotional because sometimes people cannot even put in the words the things that we deal with. Because it's so much of a consciousness that it weighs us down because it's happening sometimes from 4 different levels, 4 different ways. So that's why it's so important to constantly think about it. I really was pleased when I found so many people say that the light bulbs went off for them when they talked about the walkway. I had even emails sent to me today from other people because I've had conversations earlier today, and they said everything made sense when I realized that I have been fighting for quality of life and Black people were just fighting for a life. I'm glad that that's making sense to a certain extent, but I also want it to make so much sense that we began to deconstruct this construct of racism and dismantle its many arms by the influences and by the things that we have. I'm really struggling because by identifying as different, it seems like we are continuing to solidify the idea we are different and therefore should treat each other dissimilarly. Help me to understand. I don't understand what you're saying, Angela. Can you just say something in the mic for me? Because I want to make sure I'm following.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to say is I think what I'm struggling with is that by continuing to identify that Blacks are different than whites and yellows and brown, whatever colors we're going to identify with, right? That we're forgetting that there's this human aspect and that we're all human, and whether, you know, because sometimes, you know, if you remember my smart comment yesterday, I'm a white woman, but I've been to church in the Black community, and And I've walked in and I could easily assume that someone is judging me for being white by a look they give me, when in fact that might not be the case. I have to check in with them before I make that assumption, because it could just be they're having a bad day. They could, 9 times out of 10, they're in their own world thinking about their own stuff, and it could have been a thought that had nothing to do with me, but I just happened to look at them at the right moment. Does that make sense?
Yes,
it
makes a lot of sense. I follow.
Yeah, so I'm trying to say, how if we keep up, if we keep saying we're different, then it's almost like well, I can't classify myself with you. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I can. In what I'm saying, if let's say, if I keep saying, well, I'm different, then why would people not want to treat me differently, or be afraid of how they're supposed to treat me, or be really nervous about how they're going to talk to me? Because anything I do could be wrong, or they could view it as wrong.
Okay, I totally follow. Let's break that down a little bit, because that's a lot of stuff you said there. Remember, we talked about culture diversity before.
Right.
Go on mute for me. Thank you. Remember, we talked about culture diversity. First of all, culture diversity is the appreciation of the variety of different cultures that we have. That's the first thing. It's the appreciation and the awareness that these things exist. So the beauty of what makes us human is the fact that we are different. When we dismiss certain parts of what makes us different, we run the risk of being very Richard Henry Prattish. Because what makes us different is what makes us human. Now let's talk about the human thing. Remember, Blacks in America wasn't considered human for so long. And because they weren't considered human for so long, some of those things are still ingrained in our culture. So part of this is about us taking a moment to say, okay, it's not how I see things from a white perspective, but how are things perceived from a Black perspective, and how can I influence the change so the Blacks won't feel the way that they feel. See, we're contending with that systemic part of it. It's so ingrained that some people actually do feel this way. If you talk about racism, you're keeping racism alive. I know that wasn't your sentiment, but it was very close to that line. Like, if we talk about why we are different, that will keep that same strand of treating people differently. And so what we're talking about right now is just understanding what we go through as Black people. What is the plight when we start saying, this is what we're dealing with when we talk about racism? Somebody has their hand up. It just say iPhone. So
that would be me, Jay.
It would be you.
It would be me. I was trying to use my manners.
Okay.
I just want to make sure, like, just to say, and I'm sorry, what was the name? Angela?
Yep.
Is that the name? Angela, because I'm trying to also, she said something, and I'm trying to also clarify for myself. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, what she's asking is, if amongst the Black community itself, we're having a hard time organizing even what we want to identify as a movement, how is that not distracting? Like, what I had to do today when I was having a conversation with someone, and I'm learning all these new terms, even for my own, I'm a Black woman, but I'm learning new terms of how we identify. And what I decided today in this conversation, that it's an individual thing, it's not a group thing. And the idea is not to be offensive to anyone, but baby steps. We're just starting to start these dialogues. And my fear is that we get caught up in these identifying words instead of the issues.
Exactly.
So it's you don't want to spend a lot of time laboring over that. You really do want to just get to the topics and the issues. And one of these days, hopefully things will be so equitable that we're not having these conversations anymore. That's what this moment is, what we're working on, where that's actually not the point. The point is not worrying about if we're African American, if we're Black. It's making sure that we're not being abused, neglected, and dying because of the color of our skin, whatever you want to call it. So while it's a consideration and a step, I think the biggest thing is to, yes, address who you're talking to, if that's even a thing, but don't feel like you have to bring that up. Like as soon as you start talking, because the state of things now, they'll correct you, but don't get caught up in the correction. That's also, I think, part of the ally work is we have to not be so thin-skinned, no pun intended, but we have to be able to move past that dialogue and start working together. So that's not a stumbling block, but it is something that you do need to be cognizant of, but don't let that distract you, because I'm also trying not to be distracted by the terms that I'm learning, because that's not my mission, you know?
Yeah.
That's it.
Thank you. Y'all, that's Tara that I introduced yesterday. She's our advisory chair, and she helps us a lot. She actually had insight in the development of this presentation. Okay? And they said they love it, Tara. Now, let's talk about it. We're going to get an understanding of the terms. First of all, we realize that, remember, some of these words are going to be triggers. White privilege, we hear that a lot, but we usually just have it as just privilege. Inherent advantages possessed by a white person on the basis of their race in a society characterized by racial inequality and injustice. A lot of times when we start talking about white privilege, I had this conversation on social media. It seemed like I'm having it every day now. For some strange reason, I have become the person that people want to express this to. But white privilege doesn't mean you didn't work for what you have. It doesn't mean you didn't have struggles or challenges in your life, but it does mean that there are certain advantages that you had just because of the color of your skin. The luxury of waking up every day and saying things such as, well, why can't we just be human? Well, first of all, we got to contend with the fact of, first we're called Black and then we're called savages, or we're anything but. Every Black person is reminded that they're Black. The luxury of just waking up and not thinking about the color of our skin is a beautiful thing. And if you have that privilege, that is something that you do want to treasure. Because it's so hard to just get past that sometimes. Figuring out the conversations that we need to have with our children about how they will be judged just based off of the color of their skin. So understand that privilege may be a trigger word for you because we'll automatically think, well, I didn't live a privileged life. But the privilege we're talking about is basic humanitarian luxuries that we don't have. Carla said, I like that you keep using the word luxury. Yeah, I typically, I don't know why I do this, but I'm one of those people, if I find out that a word is triggering for people, I try not to use that word. It kind of goes with what Tara was talking about, because it's not so much in the lingo for me. It's about the point. And I want to make sure that it's not offending anyone, because once an offense has happened, you have just that offense between you and that person, and it creates a barrier and they shut down. So, but it's very important to understand that there are several people that are not like Jay. There's several people that are not like Tara, who will not adapt or change their lingo to drive home a point. But it's very important to understand the message behind it. It is just that there are certain privileges that one receives just by the color of their skin. Kristen said the word luxury cuts it right to the point and makes it more clear. Okay, well, thank you. I'm glad that it does. Does anyone have tips on how to talk to the kids about this? Oh, we do. Carla, you want to take this one?
Yeah, so I actually talk about this in my English 1 classes. I have built an entire unit around social justice and systemic injustice. And part of that systemic injustice is we talk about racist practices that were built into all of the systems that we have in this country. And one of the ways that I introduce this unit is by talking about white privilege. And you have to understand that I teach at a mostly all-white school. They are very upper middle class, and so I have to approach this carefully, but I start by explaining all different types of privilege, and I save white privilege for last. And I have found that if I talk about other types of privilege, for example, gender privilege or ability privilege or that sort of thing, that they latch onto that very easily. And so when I introduce white privilege, it's easier for them to digest. And I show them several videos that I have. We read several articles. And I also make sure that I keep reiterating when I am talking about white privilege, that's not for them to feel like they're a bad person. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It only becomes a bad thing if you continue to use it for your advantage at someone else's disadvantage. So I talk about how you're born with privilege. You can't help that. Some people are more privileged with the amount of money that their family makes. They can't help that either. But it's just important to acknowledge it and understand that you have it so that you don't use it to the detriment of someone else.
And white fragility is nothing more than, it says discomfort and defensiveness, but it really is the sensitivity that one feels when confronted with these things. Mostly racial inequality and injustice, but it usually is wrapped up in privilege. A lot of times when you see that, it's usually when the tension of, I'm not privileged, I'd work for this and blah, 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 or I'm not racist. Remember we talked about that before? This is the response to it. So we want to make sure that when we're dealing with this, this is where Sacred Box, this is why I introduced Sacred Box early on. If you feel a level of discomfort or defensiveness, why am I feeling this way? Is it, going back to what Tara said, is it what I identify the term as, meaning it's an immoral person, or is it an ignorant person or an extremist person? Is it those things that I have with it? Or is it that I'm embarrassed? Am I insulted? Whatever the root of it is, we need to investigate that by yourself because no one can solve that for you. But if it's a sensitive area for you, pain is there for a reason. It's telling you, hey, pay attention to that. All white people need to read White Fragility. It's spot on. The root of so much is refusing to acknowledge privilege is pride, humility, teachability can help us understand. And I hope that Carla answered your question about ways to introduce it to your children. I use a different, I usually do just somewhat different. My kids are also younger, and I had to have the conversation about them younger. Like I told you with Wake County, it introduced it to them in kindergarten. So we had to find creative ways to talk about those different things and actually use family members as examples. So I will say when it comes to these things, there is a way to be very sensitive and very serious about it, but don't be so rigid that it comes across as awkward, you know? So you definitely want to get to a point where you can discuss that. And if you need help or need ally assistance from other allies, partner with one another and come up with ways to make sure that you're reinforcing healthy habits too, because remember, communication is a transfer. It may not just be the words, it may be how you conduct yourself that may confuse the children as well. White people don't like being too referred to as white because we have never had to think about race for ourselves. That is really good, Carl. That is really good. I never even thought about it. Look, dong. So let's talk about oppression, because that tends to come up a lot. Oppression, prolonged, cruel, or unjust treatment or control. Exploitation is a type of oppression. When we're talking about oppression, just like we talked about the many arms of racism, we're going to talk about the many arms of oppression, is the act of using people's labors to produce profit while not compensating them fairly. Marginalization is the act of can't talk today. Relegating or confining a group of people to a lower social standing or outer limit or edge of society. That tends to happen a lot, right? If we really talk about the history of some of these towns, it tends to happen. A lot of people will say that certain areas are bad or not good because of the type of people that live there. And I had an opportunity to talk to Tara about her art studio because it's near downtown Raleigh, but I never knew that the area that it was in was a dangerous, quote unquote, perceived as a dangerous place. Now, when I moved to Holly Springs, I was told, don't go to this side of Raleigh, don't go. But here I am almost every weekend in that side of Raleigh and didn't know. And so there are people who don't shop, who don't go to that side of the area because of a perceived notion of a group of people who are over there. And so then they push them people far away so they don't have to visit them. They build a whole world. It's like they build an invisible wall just so they don't have to do that. They build their own shops. They build their own things. They do all of those things to make sure they don't have any reason to go to that other side. We cut people off of access based off of presumptions and assumptions. Another way to introduce to young children is to introduce Black appreciation in regular life. Does your daughter own a brown-skinned doll? Can you visit a Black church? Do you say nice things about brown-skinned people in general? Natural discussion will happen. Thank you for that, Tara. Cultural imperialism involves taking the culture of the ruling class and establishing it as the norm. We can't say that doesn't happen here, right? We always say that someone doesn't speak proper English, but America doesn't have an official language. So we find ourselves critiquing people based off of this unwritten rule of how things should be. We force ourselves, we talked about the code switching that happens. That we have to try to assimilate to what is perceived to be as white as possible to be accepted. Even the way that we give compliments is always in favor of it being white. Veronica said segregation is still with us. Yes, it very much is. Carla, you have something you was about to say? Ed, you had something you was about to say. Yes, Ed.
Yeah, so, you talked about, the compliments. I had a Caucasian gentleman, thought he was giving me a compliment. He basically said to me, you speak very well for a Black person. And I kind of looked at him like, did you really just say that? Then he doubled down on it and said, did you take dictation classes? Because I normally can tell when I'm talking to someone Black. And I kindly replied to him, what does that mean? What is talking Black? And then he started turning 3 shades of red. So, me working in corporate America, and I worked in the financial industry where it is like 99.999% white, I got compliments like that on a regular basis.
Right. And here's the funny thing, though, when we talk about this, a lot of people really think that that is a compliment, but they don't understand that the foundation of that is you already have a race and a culture in mind that you think is superior. So complimenting someone to that, you're like, oh, that was a compliment. See, this is the greatest thing ever. Like, no, that wasn't. That really wasn't. It was bad, Richard. How would anyone ever think it's okay? That's the part we can't even try to figure out. It's like Tara said, let's not even try to figure out that part. Let's just know that those things are not right and they shouldn't happen, but they do happen regularly. I will say that I don't feel like why I need to tell you this, but I do because it does happen. It's not okay to pet people of color's hair either, or to just randomly touch it, okay? So that happens quite often, especially in elevators or when we're out and about. Yes, let's not touch people's hair without their permission. It's like in school, keep your hands to yourself. People don't like that. It really is offensive to be touching people's hair and trying to feel what their texture is like and things like that. A lot of that happens. So let's just make sure we don't do that either, okay? And then the last and obvious one is violence. It's probably the most obvious and visible form of oppression. And I will say what's an irritant more than anything, when we know that the violence is a result of racism, for someone to say, how do we know it was racism? That is probably the worst thing that you could say to a person, because remember, we talked about we deal with so much. Most people can see it. And so what we're hoping is that you open your lenses to say, okay, let me observe these behaviors and actually see how it can be perceived. Because one of the luxuries of not being Black is that for some strange reason, we have created a culture where now we define oppression for non-Blacks. We go through it and say, okay, this is why it's considered racism. See, that's a luxury that we don't realize that we're getting when people are explaining certain things to us. It has now become the norm to be explained something that you don't understand without exercising some of the things before you, okay? So make sure you're understanding that part as well. Equality. In the same manner or the same. It's very important not to confuse equality with equity. The quality of being fair and impartial. Tara said that a lot of lenses were open these few weeks, and that's the difference this time. A lot of lenses are being opened, and I do want to clarify, a lot of people think that the lenses are being opened because, or they think that the focus is around George Floyd, or the focus is around Ahmaud Arbery or Breonna Walker. No, that is not what it is. They are just part of the bigger problem. These are things that Blacks have been saying for years that no one has paid attention to. It just so happened the eyes are open. So this is not just about George. This is not just about Ahmaud. This is not just about Breonna. This is not just about the countless others who were killed by officers and they were unarmed. It's not even about just cops and Blacks. This is about people who are being killed routinely every day, because Ahmaud wasn't killed by a cop. They were retired and two of them weren't even cops. There's several other Blacks. George Zimmerman was not a cop. They're a security at best, but not a cop. There are several Blacks who are killed daily just because of the color of their skin. There are several opportunities that are missed for Blacks just because of the color of their skin. There are several people who are dying in facilities just because of the color of their skin. The list goes on and on. So I don't want us to get so caught up in who this is about versus what this is about. This is about the bigger picture. This is about igniting change to change the whole culture that we have as racism that is systematic, amorphic, and individual. We want to change all of that together. And we want more than equality. We want it to be equitable as well. Those instances with Amy Cooper calling and choking her dog, that was the poison. Right, Amy Cooper knew how to use her privilege to her advantage. She knew by being a white woman, if she says that she's in distress and the attacker is a black man, that would ignite rage and people would come to aid her. She also knew that we don't live in a world where you're innocent until proven guilty. You're guilty until proven innocent when you're black. She knew that. So she used everything within her power to work to her advantage. Well, she thought. But she is a direct result and a product of being bred in a racist culture. She used it to her advantage. Now, when we start talking about racism, I definitely want to make sure that we start talking about nationalities. Because for some strange reason, anytime racism comes up, we confuse that with patriotism. We think just because I am calling something out, I am disrespecting my country. I can say there's things that I don't like about my country and still be very American. So when you hear people say certain things like, go back to your country or go back to where you're from, like, this is my country. I'm a citizen. I'm a citizen, and a lot of people struggle with these words of nationality, race, and ethnicity, and that's why I want to make sure that we talk about it, because a lot of people don't know. Like, some people will come and tell people, like, what is your nationality? American? That's my nationality. I mean, where are you from? Augusta, Georgia? That's where I'm from. But you have people who will say certain things and don't realize that it's offensive. In all honesty, I'm ashamed as I am to admit this, it was the Amy Cooper story that made me realize that this is something I need to be active when it comes to being anti-racist. No, that's nothing, nothing you should be ashamed of, Caroline. And I want to make this clear for all of you guys. Whenever you're doing any effort to help someone, going back to what Tara said, don't get caught up in the correction. Don't get caught up in if you find something out about yourself that you didn't know that existed. Be proud of yourself for taking action and correcting that change. Be proud of yourself for being afforded the opportunity and using that moment as a learning experience to be better and help our society. Don't feel guilty or don't feel bad for things you didn't know or may not have worked out as you thought in your mind. Learn from it. Move on. Like the good thing about that, Caroline, is that is something that will always resonate with you. To not be an Amy Cooper. Just like it resonated with some people who said to not be a Richard. It is a beautiful thing that you begin to realize that now. And if it took an Amy Cooper for you to realize that, that's an awesome thing. Because now in the back of your mind, you would know not to be an Amy Cooper, and you would know that, okay, there must be a luxury that I do have, and I should not use that luxury to oppress other people. So that's a beautiful thing that you even acknowledge it. So I want to commend you for even acknowledging that that happened. So definitely don't be ashamed about that. Thank you for your voice. We need this shift. Don't be ashamed. You see it's coming. It takes courage to admit we need change. Yep. See, we all in this together. You don't want me to start singing a Disney musical because I do it. I have girls too. I know them. Race. By historical and common usage, the group, subspecies, in a traditional scientific use. That's how it started. That's why when I saw Negroid, I was like, whoa, I didn't see all that. But a person belongs to as a result of a mix of physical features such as skin color, hair texture, which reflects ancestry, geographical origins as identified by others, or increasingly self-identified. The importance of social factors in the creation and the perpetuation of racial categories has led to the concept of broadening to include a common social and political heritage, making its use similar to ethnicity. Race and ethnicity are increasingly used as synonyms, causing some confusion and leading to hybrid terms as race, ethnicity. So you see how this is confusing? The other thing about race is that not every country has it, and we have now confused race as an ethnicity. There's no country black. I know it sounds funny, right? But I'm serious. There is no country black. So it's impossible for a race to be an ethnicity. A race is a category that the United States did to define people. Race is such a pain point because the black race in America has changed terms so many times. And a lot of it, we didn't have any say in it. But also race is also a way of instilling certain beliefs and certain values into generations. Like, how many of you knew that the white race now included Northern Africa and the Middle East? Did y'all know that? That's what I read it yesterday. Okay. For anybody, do you want to take a stab at what that could possibly be teaching our children of today? Anybody? Just one person who want to take a stab at it. Anybody? Okay. Well, I'll tell you. If you now look at the modern definition or the classification of race in America, I'm trying to pull it up because I didn't put it in my notes. I wasn't prepared. Forgive me. So when you look up what those classes are, as far as what it means for like, you're now telling Black people that majority of the advanced technology and education, majority of the leading religions, the ways of think, the way that influences our culture today all came from white people. So in addition to living in an oppressed society, you now have people believing. There is a generation of people that believe that a lot of those things that were people of color are now Black, are now white. So, white. Any person having origins or any original people in Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. The definition for Black or African American has changed again. A person having origins in any Black racial groups of Africa. Terms such as Haitian or Negro can be used in addition to Black or African American. This is 2020, my people. This is what people are taught. Yes, race is a social construct, but it is a construct that is designed to oppress people and elevate another people. Unfortunately, Blacks have been on the latter of that, but it also is defined by telling another narrative of things that we value. This is why race is such a sensitive subject, because even in the way that we're being classified, it is still taking things away from us. The very little heritage that we have left, the very little history that we know about ourselves, they're now taking it and changing it just by changing the classification. Black History Month is usually a shocker for most. That's when we have written permission to discuss our achievements. Does that not sound crazy? That's the things that we do have to contend with. So when we talk about race, we're talking about so many different things. Ethnicity. Ethnicity is, can't see because I got the thing in my way. Ethnicity is the social group a person belongs to, either identifies with or is identified with by others as a result of a mix of cultural and other factors, including language, diet, religion, ancestry, and physical features traditionally associated with race. Increasingly, the concept of being used simultaneously with race, but the trend is pragmatic rather than scientific. Any thoughts on that? Any thoughts? Tara, what you got?
I don't even believe you just said, Tara, what you got?
Yep.
No, what I got is, once again, I even say, and hopefully this comforts everyone, we are all learning together. Jay is a wordsmith, and he forgets that the rest of us aren't. So I need to study all this, Jay. I need you playing games. It's a lot to take in, and it's a lot to break down and digest. And you see from these simple definitions. I mean, you got 3 words up here. And it is the catalyst to so much confusion and division. And this is what we as a collective moving forward have to digest and even see a healthy way to use any of these words, because they have a purpose. The problem is they've been weaponized, and we have to unweaponize them. So that's what I'm sitting here thinking about right now, is how to make this not all be a bad thing, and how to move forward in understanding and making this something that we can work together to just not even have so many categories that make any difference in our daily life, period.
I agree. And I think that the reason why we started this with your sacred box, it is the way that you look at things determines the way that you perceive things. Like for me, a lot of times I don't look at whether something is good or bad. Sometimes things are just the way that they are. And we live in a society where either you're against me, either you're for me or you're against me, and that's not true. I cannot believe certain things or not subscribe to certain things, but at the same time, be for you to succeed and be cheering you on, even though I may not support an action that you've done. We got to get rid of this throwing the baby out with the bathwater type concept. You know what I mean? We got to get to a place where now that we have this, and these actually didn't even come from me. That's the funny thing. This actually came from the government website. And I wanted us to know that, because just like it is becoming convoluted right here in these terms, that is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a hodgepodge of people who grew up in different generations who identify to things differently. And then if we don't respect the subculture of individuals because we lump them all together, how then can we truly have culture appreciation? And how can we stop the assumptions if we're not having the dialogue to begin with? But I think that the conversation comes with understanding origins. Then work comes from not staying at the starting line, but moving forth. Agreed. This is a lot to digest, but this conversation proves that it must and can happen. And that's what we want. Because when we talk about allying with individuals and we want to talk about the complexities of racism, we need to be able to really think about, okay, before I type this or before I say this, what all is going into this statement? What all is going into this belief that I even have? And some of us are afraid to even respond for that very reason. So, like we said before, that sacred box. Now, I do have a question. Did anybody spend time reflecting on that sacred box? And for those who it is your first time, your sacred box is a place that you've created to protect, that we've created to protect our most valuable experience, thoughts, ideas, beliefs, feelings, and anything else we believe to be sacred. Did anyone since last night have any like aha moments about things that they were protecting, that they really held a value that could be somewhat damaging? No, no one?
Hey, Jay?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about that, I feel like I need like a couple of months to really completely understand it. But what I understand so far has helped me, even as I'm scrolling through something like Facebook and seeing a white person's post, holding and clinging on so hard to what they think is part of their sacred box. And that has helped me to understand why people do hurtful things. And it's helped me to evaluate myself, of course, too. But just remembering, honestly, that rang through my mind when I looked at a particular person's Facebook post where she posted something saying, Lives Matter is a leftist philosophy, this whole thing. And I just thought, wow, there's something in her sacred box that she is holding on to so tightly right now. So it's been really enlightening for me. I'm still learning.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that too. And guys, I give Angie a little homework. I send her a video and I say, tell me what you think is wrong with this video. And she's been getting it spot on because now she's being in tune to certain things that impact. And she's like, okay, I can see it now. And she's been like spot on every time. So good job, Angie, and thank you. Now, implicit versus explicit. There is no neutrality. There is only greater or lesser awareness of one's bias. That was by Phyllis Rose. That's pretty heavy, right? Anybody want to take a stab at what you're getting from it or how you feel about it?
Yeah. So what I get from that statement is that very rarely, even when people may say that they're in the middle or they don't feel one way or the other, generally they actually do. They just may not want to express it at that time.
Thank you for that. Angela said, I'm still thinking about ethnicity and race. I think that there are two different boxes on applications. So no matter my color, I can choose one thing for race and opposing view for ethnicity. Talk about confusing corporate America if we did that. You actually are right. That's the whole point of that. Race is a category, ethnicity is something different from race. And so you're not wrong with that. That's like a beautiful That's a beautiful assumption. And you are very correct with that. And a lot of people don't realize that. So hats off to you, Angela, for that. Sarah said, I think it came down to the expectations that we place on others and ourselves. As you shared in the Love is a Parable video, that really helped me understand some things in my sacred box as well as others, like my mother's, okay? We will always be a product of our environment and experiences, but the more we know, the more we can change. Carla said, every single person has bias and prejudice. And if we say we don't, we are lying to ourselves. I don't have bias. I'm a good person, Carla. That's what it sounds like when we say certain things, but the truth of the matter is we do. And just like she said, your bias or prejudice is based off of things that you value or you believe to be true, and you have housed them in your sacred box. And because you do them, and because you protect them so much, that's why they're sacred to you, because you protecting them. But it's your responsibility to know that they are there. Because when you don't know that they are there, you don't know the damage that you're doing. And a lot of us are trying to be conscious of things that are that we're unconscious to. That's why implicit bias is also known as unconscious bias. It's not things that you're intentionally thinking of, but it is things that are ingrained in you. So you do need a moment to reflect on the things that you do or the habits that jokes that you entertain. There are certain jokes that are really ingrained in racism. There are certain comments that we use even today that are really ingrained in racism. But we don't know it because we look at it every day. Like, for instance, if the Lord's willing and the creek don't rise, a lot of people don't know that that's very offensive. But we say it all the time. Will you see me tomorrow? Lord willing, the creek don't rise. We don't know that those things are enriched in racism. And they are shaping and telling a narrative. And so we got to be mindful of those things. That's why it's like, well, what do I value? And so sometimes we kid ourselves when we say certain things like they don't exist. Where did that expression come from? I forgot the general, but it came from basically if it was a rise attack against the Creek Indians. So that's where it came from. And some have used it to say they're talking about flooding out certain areas, but it really came from a war against the Creek. So if we have God on our side, and if the Creek Indians don't rise up against us. So those type of things come, and we don't even realize that they are there. But guys, like we've been saying, more than anything, when it comes to implicit bias, the true enemy is confusion and assumptions of motives. The true enemy is confusion of assumptions and motives. Community comes from the Latin word humanus, which means to share. But what is shared? So when we talk about community, we have to start focusing on the things that we share alike. I think somewhere along the way in our various communities, we forget about community. Even though the word is openly expressed to come in unity, we have replaced the sharing with merely gathering. Like some of us just feel like, well, we all here together, so that's a sense of community, right? In our desperate attempt, we talk about this a lot, to be politically correct in the name of inclusion, we've lumped all things together, assuming because we gather, we are on one accord, but unfortunately, the gathering only creates hostilities when it's rooted in survival. Some of us are making this ally thing, and I want to say this, we're making this ally thing so much of a competition that we're losing sight of the good. There was a anti-racism march, like I said before, in Holly Springs. Some whites were getting on other whites because there wasn't any black representation. No, we don't want to be marching. We don't want to be fighting for equality. We want you to do it. You fix it because it's a system that we're already fighting against. So you fighting on our behalf is the best type of allyship, and we don't have to be there. That is gorgeous. Do it. By all means, have at it. And let's not fight one another for attempting to bring awareness to an issue that's affecting all of us. The fact that it's happening in all white societies or all white neighborhoods, that means it's affecting you too, and that do mean we're a community. That's a good thing. So don't knock the people for doing that, okay? So this is where we remove the hostility, because it's not a competition. It's about appreciation. We are diversified for a reason, and it's not for the sake, if not for the sake of anything else but awareness and appreciation. There should be nothing skeptical about goodwill. So when you come with each other and you have good intentions, you shouldn't be skeptical about the good things that are happening. See, we can thrive individually. We can thrive as business and corporations if we quickly return back to the things that we share alike. We do all have common goals. We all want to belong. We all want to have certain things in our lives. We want to be happy. We want to be liberated. We want to be esteemed. We want those things. Those are the things that we share. And we can do those things if we remove the distractions. Oh, Terry, get out my head. Comparison. If we move the distractions of competition, if we move the distractions of always trying to perfect allyship. No, we don't have to do that, guys. Use your realm of influence. Terry, get out my head. Goodness gracious. Use your realm of influence, your luxuries that you have by the color of your skin to make someone else's life easier, to tear down those walls. I tell people all the time, I don't want to sit there and fight with you about your privilege. Just use your privilege to make this world a better place. You got it. It ain't your fault that you got it. Use it. Just use it for good. We defending the wrong things and we fighting the wrong things. We don't want you to be equal with us in our oppression, because we don't even want to be oppressed, first of all. So if you want to be oppressed, we're like, you can have at it. We just want equality and equity. Okay? So, takeaways for tonight. I want you to continue the self-reflection. It's very important to make it a habit to reflect on the things that you value, because this is only going to be a 3-day workshop. And I don't want you to say, oh, I took the workshop, so now I get my ally card. No, it's not about that. It's every day we want to work on self-reflection, looking at the things that we entertain, talking about the conversations, looking at the way that we perceive things. We want to really make sure we're doing that every day, because every day that you become more and more comfortable with addressing the contents that are in your sacred box, every day you become closer to helping us end this nasty thing like racism. I plead with you not to stop self-reflection, not stop observing the behaviors of those that you're deeply connected to and you work with on a day-to-day basis or you operate with. I challenge you to still get connected. There's several social media groups that's going on right now. I've been added to, I can't even tell you, probably been about 20. But there's ways to get engaged and there's ways to have healthy dialogue, because at least people are communicating. Patronize and support a minority-owned business. Some of you guys are doing that right now, but do more than just give financially, because we just don't want you to give to take the guilt away or take the pain away, if you will. But find out about that business. Find out those experiences, like what make that business thrive or what make that business a great place. Embrace the culture, embrace the atmosphere. I know right now we're doing social distancing, and some restaurants and some organizations are at 50%. That's fine, but you still can go and get some type of experience. When you get outside of your comfort zone, it won't seem so scary and it won't seem so intimidating. Okay, so that's your 3 takeaways. I will put those in the group. Now, do we have any questions? Well, once again, I thank you guys so much for taking this opportunity to learn more about it. Oh, the Facebook group? The Facebook group is Implicit Bias Group. Let me find the link. I'm gonna put it in here right now because I just realized we do have some newbies. So give me 1 second, I'm gonna put it in. But if you already have it, definitely join up for the group. And so I'm looking for it now. Getting it now. Okay. There you go. I put it in there. Well, no, I didn't. Let me do everybody. Let me try that again. There we go. So that's the Facebook group. You can just copy it if you need it. So you can go ahead and join the group because I'm gonna put all of those things in there and we'll be good to go. I see some of you are already doing it. Thank you so much. So if you have everything, we'll see you guys tomorrow as we wrap up.
Thank you, Jay.
Nope, thank you.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good night.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.